I'm Tian, and welcome to World Insight. I'm in Southeast Asia this week, providing you insights to the ongoing G20 and APEC meetings being held in Indonesia and Thailand, respectively, this year. Group of 20 leaders opened talks on Tuesday on the island of Bali. The international community is eager to hear their answers to fixing a troubled world and keen to find out what concrete actions they take for peace and growth. In the context of the G20 multilateral framework, the presidents of China and the U.S. met Monday. They vowed to lay the important groundwork to buck the trend of a once fast-deteriorating bilateral relationship. The talk took 3 hours with goodwill messages going out and a clear bilateral mechanism for consultations on trade, finance, and climate change. The world has been watching very closely this important step forward between China and the U.S. top leadership. Max Baucus, the former U.S. ambassador to China and a longtime influential figure on Capitol Hill, spoke with me about the Xi-Biden meeting. Ambassador Baucus, what a pleasure to see you once again. Tell me more about your assessment of the meeting between Chinese and the U.S. presidents.
I thought it was a good meeting. I'm very pleased. There were two adults in the room, each very respectful of the other, each representing one of the two largest economies in the world. And I underline the word respectful. I think each was very respectful, didn't call names either way, and did not personalize it, but talked about problems for 3.5 hours. Now, I hope that they meet more frequently. Person-to-person meetings are very beneficial. And if President Xi and President Biden were to say, lock in every 6 months a meeting somewhere and just lock it in, that would help very, very much. The real problem, though, is the question is, what's next? When President Biden goes back home to the U.S., President Xi back home to China, then each has to face the domestic politics in his own country.
Of course, these two leaders came to the G20 summit for this bilateral meeting after somewhat the wrap-up of the domestic political agenda. For China, it's the 20th Party Congress, and for the U.S. midterm election, the Democrat, your party, is having a slim majority of the Senate. So how do you see their capabilities, the two leaders, to implement what they promised?
Well, first, each is going to go back and try to implement what was generally agreed to at Bali. Now, there was no real agreement except just to work together, communicate together. President Biden will face pretty strong pressure from hawks in the United States. They tend to be in the Republican Party, but there are a lot of hawks in the Democratic Party, too. That's a big problem he's going to have. And President Xi has his own domestic issues in China. Now, there's a slight difference here. Even though both came off of wins, each had a good feeling with President Biden with the midterms, which generally turned out better for Democrats than he would have expected. And President Xi, now selected to his third 5-year term. But the difference here is that China is not certain how long President Biden is going to be president. He may not run again. And if he does run again, he may be defeated. So President Xi appreciates what Biden said, but he knows that Biden faces significant domestic problems, China issues at home, and President Xi knows that Biden may not run again, may not be reelected. So he has to take what Biden said with a few grains of salt.
Now, the two has already talked about the quote-unquote laying the groundwork of the relations between the two countries. Among all of those they mentioned, what do you see as the most significant part of laying the groundwork?
Well, I think working together, those are nice words, and I think they really meant it. There's no question about that. But there are issues. Taiwan is still a major issue. If you read the statements of each very carefully, it's quite clear that from China's perspective, the United States is not doing all that China would like U.S. to do with respect to Taiwan. That is, even though President Biden adheres to the one China policy and wants to maintain stability across the straits, he did not say that he really supports unification, peaceful unification, which is exactly what China wants. The big question here is now what's going to happen next. There's legislation in the Congress called the Taiwan Policy Act, which will bolster the hawks in the U.S. and very much upset China. Now, we'll see whether Biden allows that legislation to go through. He may temper it. He may force Congress to amend it, soften it down. He may veto it. But on the other hand, that's a major potential flashpoint, additional flashpoint in the relationship. Well, excuse me, from the Chinese perspective, U.S. may say it adheres to the one China policy, but the actions it's taking tend to show us something else.
So on the other hand, the U.S. has been describing China as a competitor. And yet, according to the latest interactions with the Chinese Foreign Minister, State Councilor Wang Yi, he does not believe that it should be the way. There should be a lot more talk about cooperation as well between China and the United States. So, Mr. Ambassador, how would you see the ways to smartly describe the nature of relations between China and the United States today, if that is really for the benefits of the two countries?
I think both leaders should talk a little bit more about cooperation. When the United States talks about competition with China, but not conflict, the word competition carries overtones of a little bit more than competition. And one has to ask oneself, what does competition mean? Is there a winner? Is there a loser? Is it like a football game? Is it like a ping pong match? We don't know. And that's partly because domestic politics in America so strongly push the United States to compete with China. Now, part of the problem, and also there are many United States that want to stop China's rise and want to stop China's rise by preventing semiconductors, high-end semiconductors from being exported to China and semiconductor machines from being exported to China. So it's really, really tough. And I wish the administration, frankly, would talk, the U.S. administration, would talk not only about competition, but more about cooperation and more aggressively in the areas that we know are so important. The easy ones are global health and climate and so forth. But even in Taiwan, really, it's hard. It's very hard. And it's hard, I'm not in the shoes of President Biden. I don't know all the problems that he's facing, but I do know, having served in Congress for many years, some of the forces that he's facing. But he's smart, and bottom line, he wants to work with China, even though the domestic politics at home make it very difficult.
Now, already, Ambassador Kerry already met with Ambassador Xie Zhenhua during the COP27. They talked to one another, and the media caught that moment. So how do you see the level of communications about climate change between the two countries? Are there some starting points?
Well, I certainly hope so. There's a further problem here, and that's that these new rounds of climate change talks, there's a big question between the haves and the have-nots. That is, the developing countries want financial support from the U.S. and from other developed countries.
But on the other hand, Mr. Ambassador, as you know, the developed economies has long promised the developing countries to provide funding, $100 billion to start with over a period of time. And now they are still short of supply of cash, even today. So it seems that there is a historical debt that's already piled up with empty promises.
I agree with you. It's unfortunate, but I think all of us are realists. We know that heads of governments like to say nice sounding things because it helps them, but we also know that reality sometimes prevents those nice sounding promises from reaching fruition.
Mr. Ambassador, if you look at the latest development, the bilateral meeting taking place on the sideline of a multilateral setup of the G20, how much do you see that China-U.S. relations, the nature of it, will it be more about bilateral in the future, or will it be more about the momentum for multilateral issues?
Well, I think it first depends upon the U.S.-China relationship. If that's beginning to thaw, if the relationship is starting to turn out well, and that is a lot better than it has in the past, that's going to provide some space for multilateral negotiations, because most, I think, developing countries, especially in Southeast Asia, are looking to see how well the U.S. and China get along. And if they get along a little better, then that'll make it easier for them to make concessions and make it easier for them to agree that perhaps China should be part of a multilateral trade group. There are lots of opportunities there. And it's very important that the United States and China try to work out with other countries, especially in Southeast Asia, some kind of a trade agreement. There are many have been proposed, irrespective of the numbers. There are lots of numbers and lots of letters and all that kind of thing. It's important that agreement be reached. At least try. It's very important to make that effort. The United States and China depend upon each other so much. The trade last year is over $600 billion. And if there's a significant decoupling between the United States and China, that'll be devastating to the economies, not just of the United States and China, but of the world.
Since you talk about Asia and ASEAN countries, I would love to ask you about both the opportunities and the challenges. The U.S. earlier with this administration have already framed the Indo-Pacific, quote unquote. Well, in this part of the world, the concept of Asia-Pacific is still very much embraced. We see after the G20, there's going to be the APEC CEO summit together with the APEC economic leaders meeting. That's a reflection of, how people are putting the emphasis on the region's future. So how do you see these a new concept coming from this administration in the U.S. about the so-called Indo-Pacific? Will that prevent the U.S. from getting more proactive role in the region and cooperate without forcing others to take side, either with China or the United States?
I think that President Biden would like to have a more meaningful trade agreement with Asian countries. The Indo-Pacific Agreement is a bit weak, and it's weak because it does not provide a market access from other countries into the United States market. It's weak because, frankly, President Biden is kind of hamstrung by organized labor in Montana. President Biden sees himself kind of as lunch bucket Joe. He thinks there's nobody more champion of organized labor than he, Joe Biden. So he's beholden to organized labor, and labor is opposed to trade agreements generally. Back during the TPP, but not only did Trump oppose it, but Hillary Clinton opposed it for one basic reason: jobs, labor. So Biden is kind of hamstrung. He'd like to do more because he's basically one who wants to help expand the agreements so that the pie is larger, more could divide up the pie. But he's politically, it's difficult for him at home. Now, I think other Asian countries would like to see more of an agreement, and they like to see some way where they could, in some way, kind of play the United States off against China, because they're there in the region. They want to deal with China. They want to deal with the United States too. But they more easily could do so the more that there's an agreement. It's really important that everybody keep talking, try to find a way, because people want our countries to work together. Southeast Asian countries would like us all to work together. People do.
During the difficult years, over the past few years, RCEP is already up and functioning. Of course, it is not the most advanced level, highest level of trade agreement, but it does bring a lot of vitality to the region. And of course, China and ASEAN countries are all part of this RCEP. Now, Mr. Ambassador, how do you see the vibrancy of this part of the world, including the cooperation between China and its trading partners in the region as well, from the U.S. perspective?
Well, RCEP is important. It could be stronger, but it's important. Every step forward is important. And it's important to remember that major efforts sometimes are iterative. By that, I mean, they start small, then you have to build on it next year. Year after that, build on it even more. But once we get a start, that's extremely important. And, you know, one could say that RCEP is a good start, and we just, ASEAN countries should keep working on it, make it even stronger. But one could also say that the talks between President Biden and Xi are also a start. We just build on them. And by one way to build on it is to schedule in meaningful periodic talks again. That'd go a long, long way. So Bali is a good start, but that's good. It's great. If Bali hadn't happened, we'd be in a real kettle of fish right now. But Bali did happen, and that's very positive.
Now, with the momentum in Bali, for example, the bilateral meeting between China and the U.S., how much do you see this could contribute to the eventual discussions on the global challenges that the G20 are going to discuss and should be discussing?
Well, I was very heartened to see that President Xi is also meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia. That's a very good sign. So President Xi met not only with Biden, but with the Prime Minister of Australia. Now, they may not reach huge agreements, but they met person to person. That's good. And that shows that China is reaching out. It shows that China really wants to work with other countries.
But many do wonder, the meeting today, is it going to be a breath of fresh air? And then later, people have to dive back into the troubled water? Or this is going to be a new start of some more matured relations between China and the United States for the better of both countries and both peoples?
Well, we hope it's fresh air. That's what we hope. And if Americans and Chinese say this was fresh air, this was good, that will come through. And and the more people say that, the more it's going to come through, and the more the leaders are going to be more self-assured and feel more confident and do the right thing.
Ambassador Max Baucus, as always, thank you so much.